Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, with Dr. Vincent, we have come to labor law issues, and I'm very happy about that, because we are talking about, as Professor Rakic said us, that European community equals market, common market. So I just felt it's very economic focused, this conference. And now I think it's a little bit for the time to give a little bit our hearts as well. And I'm going to speak about the European social dimension issues as a labor and social lawyer. And first, I like to speak about the impact of Maastricht. And we all know that this Maastricht Treaty had a profound impact on the European integration. And when the countries came to the table, they all had their national vision. And when we talk about social rights and labor rights and actually social security, then it is much more the case that it is very much sticked to the nation. Much closer economic integration opened the prospect of creating a monetary union, but I think at that time in Maastricht, it was very important to ask where Europe goes really. What is the future of Europe? And one of the key achievements of Maastricht, I think, is a social and care-oriented Europe. Because you cannot grow economically if you are not strong socially. And I think this is also a question of today. From the earliest days of the European project, it was very important to reduce the negative effects that economic restructuring can have on workers. And the European Social Fund, at the time of the Maastricht Treaty, played a crucial role in it. I don't know whether you have known that, but the Maastricht Treaty paved the way for the European Union member states, for example, to improve the healthcare system. The new European Social Fund Plus continues to contribute to social Europe. And now we are talking about the European project as a social Europe project. There are very distinguished areas like young people's engagement in finding a job, or helping children in need, or trying to reskill for green and digital transition. However, in my presentation at the second point, I like to speak about the European Pillar of Social Rights. You might have all heard about that. The European Parliament gave out a resolution in 2020, and it emphasized that the progress towards a sustainable, fair, and social Europe requires the implementation of the rights and principles included in the European Pillar of Social Rights. And Dr. Vincent just emphasized how important labor mobility is. Because the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan thinks that labor mobility is one important element, as mobility is at the heart of the European project. And this mobility should be fair. What is a fair labor mobility? Ladies and gentlemen, this aim included reforms like reviewing the rules on posting of workers or the revision of the social security coordination rules, policy guidance, or for example, the fight against undeclared work. I visited my beloved colleague, Professor Martin Stefko in Prague in the beginning of April at the Charles University. And it was so nice to see how the Labor Inspectorate Ministry was involved in the research with the university in the fight against undeclared work. They have tried to collect all the examples all over in Europe, how to fight even in a sort of digital state or in a digital way against undeclared work. However, in this context, first, I would like to draw your attention to the inadequacy of the social security coordination rules. And I could speak very long about that. However, I would like to limit myself only to one point. You might have heard about the coordination rules. It's very important when you travel abroad, then something happened to you, then you should have appropriate healthcare services, for example. I've been involved in a project in the European Institute of Social Security with the support of Professor Szilágyi, and we met in Antwerp in May, and it was very interesting to experience that while we were talking about the access to unemployment benefit schemes within the Social Security on behalf of self-employed people, and we came to the coordination rules, then we just summarized that coordination rules are far from being satisfactory. And why? Because it hardly functions between the administrations, between the states. And if you think of that, it cannot be efficient enough. Fair labor mobility will never take place if we do not have proper cooperation between the administrations. With one of my students, we have been doing research on the A1 form. I don't know whether the students have applied for that abroad or anybody else, but it is absolutely nonsense what happens, for example, between Ireland and Hungary regarding highly mobile workers, how to apply for any healthcare services in Hungary or in Ireland, even if they are secured. So what is the solution? The European Commission started a project in 2021, 2 years ago. Until this day of this conference, I was looking for the outcome. You might have heard of it. It is the European Social Security Pass. Unfortunately, this outcome has not arrived. And unfortunately, we cannot speak about the advantages of it, but maybe at the next conference. So that was about coordination rules. And I do not have too many left before lunch. So next, we are talking a little bit, a totally different aspect of Maastricht, but I think it's very important, and this is aging society. And Professor Rakic, I think, referred to the global phenomenon that Europe and the whole world must face. And now I would like to emphasize this one. And why? Social rights are coming back into focus, I think, in bad economic times. I think there is not much more important thing nowadays than to feel secure wherever you are. And when global society is facing that kind of crisis that Professor Rakic also mentioned, we must not forget that social rights and social security play a key role in the answer to this. However, social law and social policy cannot be seen in itself. You all know it's a very complex issue with health, education, and tax and economic issues. New demographic trends and the population aging, you might also experience that, which includes the decline in mortality and fertility rates, as well as a long life trend, those who are lucky. These all pose unquestionable challenges for the world of work. And I didn't know that, but it is estimated that about 80% of the world's population is insufficiently protected against aging risk, particularly in terms of health protection, potential disability, stable income, and it could affect about 1.2 billion people by 2050. It's really a danger. And nowadays what we can see, that there is really an inability to find support among family members. The increase in the share of older persons in the EU population, we will see it will lead to an increased demand for care services, for example, long-term care services. what the EU policy did with all this. The European Commission has its policy on active aging. The European Pillar of Social Rights stressed that long-term care is a very important principle. The Social Protection Committee is an advisory policy committee to the ministers in the Employment and Social Affairs Council. Every 3 years, the European Commission communicates on aging from a monetary perspective. And when we are talking about common market and monetary issues, we must see how much does it cost even to the member states or at the European level to maintain these systems. Because the costs of social security are very high. And even the dependency thresholds are very inadequate all over the world, not only in the EU countries, but in Asia and also in South American countries as well. And in the next 20 years, it seems to be that the states are going to have very high expenditures of the GDP or percentage of the GDP on healthcare system. Do you hear any discussions in your country about the sustainability of your healthcare system? In Hungary, we do not have too many. I've been working with Central European colleagues, also with the support with Professor Szilágyi, which I'm very thankful, on a project, and the PhD students took part at this conference last time. Even the personnel was there, so they know all about that. It was on the sustainability of the social security system, demographic challenges and answers. And why was it interesting? Because we had the colleagues from the neighboring countries, 7 neighboring countries, even from Serbia. Professor Rakic, Filip Bojic, for example, was our co-partner. And we have seen that there are lots of measures taken in the field of the pensions. There is very few discussion on healthcare insurance and healthcare system. There are best practices, but surprisingly, in the rehabilitation and the disability issues. And there are country-specific securities. And finally, I just would like to call you some examples from our Central European reality regarding the sustainability. For example, Professor Štefko from the Czech Republic focused and tried to draw our attention in the healthcare system that they try to make it sustainable by merging health insurance companies. So you see that the financing is the key. In Slovenia, it is also a recent debate on the healthcare system in a way to introduce several social insurance companies instead of one. And it was interesting because Slovenia was the only state where there was in the constitution the right to pension from 2004, when it was very controversial regarding the active aging topic. In Slovenia, we could also find many ways of the sustainability of the pension system, like those who retire prematurely, they might find a sort of reduction in the level of the calculation percentage. And we all should consider that the interplay between public and private health insurance might contribute a lot to the sustainability. In Romania, it was also the pension eligibility and the introduction and application of points-based calculation of pensions that was one of the most successful stories. Best practices, as I told you, it seems to be that in the Czech Republic, Croatia, Romania, Poland, Slovakia and Serbia, the rehabilitation and employment of disabled people is a good story. And regarding the deinstitutionalization, in Croatia, it was laid down that non-governmental organizations and private individuals can register and open family homes. In Slovakia, like in Hungary, there are many measures to boost fertility and to support families and pregnant women. And of course, we have heard country-specific issues. You might have heard about it, Tana. Professor Vinkovic pointed out the Croatian economic emigrants, and it was a very interesting case, and I'm almost finished, but now I will tell you this. Because these economic emigrants arrived, as Professor Vinkovic points out, from Ireland in Croatia on extended weekends. By using low-cost airlines, underwent medical examinations and consumed public health services, but at the same time they also visited their relatives, spent their money to get hair and nails done, and paid for other services, spending in this way less money than if they had paid in Ireland. So there is a tourism, a sort of shopping. What did Croatia do actually against it? And it was the amendment of the Mandatory Health Insurance Act. And Professor Vinkovic pointed out it's not a sustainability issue, so I should refer to it as a country-specific issue. However, it contributed to the sustainability because pursuant to these amendments, insured persons who are not registered as unemployed individuals with the Croatian Employment Service must personally report to the Employment Service every 3 months for the purpose of verifying their insured status. We were talking about long-term care. I don't know whether in your country you have any. From this research project for the PhD students, we experienced that we have got in Central Europe 2 states where there is a sort of long-term care. There is in Slovenia a Long-Term Care Act and in Romania a long-term care strategy. But that's all. And it is actually the question of the years ahead of us, what will happen to that? And now to close. Inflation and rising energy prices are pushing an increasing number of EU citizens at risk of poverty, social exclusion, and vulnerability. We are all vulnerable, and at the end of our life, we are also be much more vulnerable. In addition, global warming, environmental protection issues, and natural resource management will directly impact the immigration and the migration, both within the EU member states and between EU and third countries. And in such conditions, discussions about sustainability after 30 years of Maastricht is a key issue. Because more than ever, it appears that the concept of a social Europe is not only endangered, but also seriously questioned in times of survival. So thank you very much for your attention.